She wore red to her own ending, and no one thought to warn her. The great ceremonial hall of the Haskins' stronghold blazed on the night of the blood moon, torches lining every wall, their orange light spilling across stone floors polished to a mirror shine. Hundreds of wolves filled the space from edge to edge, representatives of every one of the 12 clans, shoulder to shoulder in their finest, all of them watching the center of the room, all of them watching Cassie Valor. She stood at the middle of it all in a gown the color of deep crimson, her dark hair pinned back with silver thread, her hands clasped loosely at her waist to keep them from trembling. The Luna's presentation gown. She had spent 2 hours getting dressed for this night, 2 hours of careful preparation, of silver pins and steady hands, of someone else's fingers smoothing the fabric at her back and saying nothing, not a word of encouragement, not a murmur of celebration. She had not noticed the silence then. She noticed everything now. The wolves watching her were not smiling. They were not proud. Their faces held something else, something she searched for a word to name, and kept arriving at the wrong answer. Not anticipation, not warmth. Something quieter, something that lived in the eyes rather than the expression, something almost like relief. She did not understand the relief yet. Cassie kept her chin level. She had learned that in 3 years of standing beside Ignis Haskins, chin level, shoulders back, breath steady. She had learned the geometry of composure. She had practiced it the way other women practiced prayers, quietly, daily, because the court watched everything and she had never wanted to give it anything worth gossiping about. 3 years. She had given 3 years of herself to this life. She thought about that now as she stood at the center of the hall that was too quiet. 3 years of early mornings in the council chambers, listening to alpha business that she was never quite invited into, but was never explicitly asked to leave. 3 years of sitting beside Ignis at long tables, watching the way his jaw tightened before a hard conversation, learning to bring tea before he thought to ask for it. 3 years of small devotions that she had always believed were adding up to something. She thought about the morning she had reached for his hand and found the bed already empty. She thought about the way he had stopped meeting her eyes over the past few months. Not cruelly, not with contempt, just with a distance she had told herself was political pressure, the weight of ruling, nothing personal, nothing aimed at her. She had been so willing to explain it away. At the far end of the hall, Alpha King Ignis Haskins stood on the obsidian platform. He was exactly what a king was supposed to look like. Tall, broad-shouldered, sharp-jawed, his dark gold ceremonial chain catching the torchlight. He was every inch the man she had fallen in love with. He was also, Cassie realized in this moment, with a clarity so sudden it felt physical, someone she no longer recognized. His expression was closed. Not cold, that would have been easier to read. Closed. Decided. Finished, the way a book is finished when you reach the last page and set it down. He had not looked at her since she entered the hall. The clan healer, Renwick, stepped forward from the platform's left side. He was a careful man, always had been. Careful in his movements, careful in his speech, careful in the way he looked at people, as if measuring the distance between what they could handle and what he was about to tell them. He carried a document in both hands. The hall went so quiet that Cassie could hear the torches breathing. Renwick cleared his throat. He did not look at her when he read. The examination of the lunar candidate Cassie Valor, conducted under Blood Moon Protocol, has been completed and reviewed by the Healer's Circle. A pause. The results are conclusive. She felt her heart beat in her temples. The lunar candidate is unable to bear children. The word did not fall like a verdict. It fell like a door slamming shut on every version of her future at the same time. She heard the hall respond, a ripple of sound moving outward from the center, half pity and half something she could only call satisfaction, as if she had confirmed something people had already decided was true. She wanted to speak. She opened her mouth. Nothing came. Ignis descended the platform steps. Each footfall landed with the certainty of a man who had already made his decision before he entered the room. He crossed the space between them slowly, not rushing, not hesitating, and when he stopped in front of her, he was close enough that she could have reached out and touched his arm. She did not reach out. "Cassie Valor," he said. His voice carried through the hall without effort, the voice of a man built for rooms like this. "The bond between us cannot hold where there is no future to carry it forward." His eyes finally met hers, and what she saw in them nearly undid her. Not hatred, not anger. Something worse. Finality. "I release you from it." She felt it before the words were fully spoken, a sensation deep in her chest. Not pain exactly, more like the moment a sound stops and the silence rushes in. A thread she hadn't known she was holding, suddenly not there anymore. An absence so complete it had a shape. She went to her knees. Not dramatically. Not in the way people fall in stories. She simply ran out of the ability to stand, and the floor came up to meet her, cold through the crimson fabric of the gown. The hall was very loud and very far away simultaneously. Through the blurring edges of her vision, she watched Ignis turn his back. She watched him walk toward his throne. She watched the ceremony continue around her, as if she were already gone, as if she were already the kind of absence that rooms adjust to without noticing. 2 guards reached her. She did not recognize their faces. They took her arms and pulled her upright, and she let them, because there was nothing else to do. She had loved him faithfully for 3 years. It had taken him 43 seconds to end it. The guards did not speak to her. She noticed that, the particular quality of their silence, the way they kept their faces pointed forward and their grips impersonal, as if she were something requiring transport rather than a person requiring handling. She recognized both of them, Harlan Voss and Emmett Cross. She had seen Harlan every Tuesday morning for 2 years in the corridor outside the West Council room. She had once handed Emmett a cup of coffee that had been prepared for someone who had not shown up, and he had thanked her twice, once right after and once the following morning, unprompted, because he had seemed surprised that someone in her position would think to offer it. Neither of them thanked her for anything now. Neither of them met her eyes. The stronghold fell away in pieces as they moved through it. The council wing, the outer corridors, the ceremonial gates, and then the broad cobblestone road that led through the outer district and toward the silver boundary. The night air was cold and carried the smell of pine and iron, the smell of the wolf kingdom at its edges, where things were less maintained and the wild came closer to the walls. Cassie walked. When she stumbled over uneven ground, the guard steadied her, not gently, not unkindly, just efficiently, like a task being completed. The silver boundary appeared ahead as a line of pale stone markers set into the earth at intervals, worn smooth by centuries of weather and touch. Beyond it, the Ashwood began. She had seen it from a distance her entire life, the dark mass of trees that sat at the eastern edge of the Haskins' territory, too close to be comfortable, too ancient to be moved. Wolves did not go into the Ashwood. Wolf children were told from the time they could understand stories that the forest consumed things that entered it and did not bring them back. Harlan Voss stopped at the last stone marker. Emmett Cross stopped beside him. They released her arms. Cassie stood on her side of the boundary and looked at what was ahead. Ancient trees, their bark so dark it seemed to pull light inward rather than reflect it. Branches reaching upward at angles that were almost deliberate, as if something had arranged them by hand. A silence so deep and absolute it felt like a decision rather than an absence of sound. She was aware of Harlan opening his mouth behind her. She was aware of the breath he drew. She was aware of him closing his mouth again without speaking, because, whatever he had intended to say, he apparently decided it served no purpose. Good. She was past the point where words of that kind would have helped anything. Then it should feel right at home with me, Cassie said quietly. To no one and nothing in particular. To the trees themselves, maybe. Or to the night. She crossed the boundary. The change was immediate and unlike anything she expected. The air dropped several degrees between one step and the next, not gradually but all at once, as if the temperature had been organized differently on this side of the line. The smell changed too, not unpleasant, nothing rotting or wrong, just different. Something metallic beneath the wood scent. Something older than the trees themselves, as if the ground beneath her feet had been soaking in time for longer than the forest had been standing. She kept walking. The trees were enormous up close, trunks wider than she could wrap her arms around, their surfaces almost smooth, as if whatever roughness bark usually carries had been worn away by something gradual and patient. Their branches did not creak. They were perfectly still in the windless air. But they breathed. She felt that, as fact, before she could explain it. A rhythm in the atmosphere, slow and even, that matched no animal she had ever encountered. She walked until her body stopped cooperating. It was not dramatic. Her legs simply reached their limit and declined to continue, and she folded down at the base of a tree whose roots shifted slightly as she sank against it. A small, subtle adjustment, as if making space for her specifically. She noticed it, but was too exhausted to examine what it meant. And then, finally, alone and unwatched, and no longer required to maintain the shape of a person holding herself together, Cassie let go. She did not weep the way people wept in the ceremonial hall, loudly, with the awareness of an audience. She wept the way people wept when they were genuinely destroyed, and no one was watching, quietly, brokenly, without any of the grace that grief acquired when it was performed for other people. Tears slid sideways across her face and into her hair. Her chest heaved in irregular rhythms, her hands pressed flat against the roots beside her, gripping something solid because everything else had become unsolid. She let herself think about it. All of it. 3 years of mornings spent learning the particular way Ignis Haskins took his tea. 3 years of positioning herself in rooms so he was never without someone at his shoulder who understood the undercurrent of a meeting before it surfaced. 3 years of choosing, every single day, to be the kind of woman who anticipated what was needed rather than demanding what she was owed. She had believed that was love. She had believed that was how love worked, quietly, consistently, through accumulation. She had told herself that being seen was secondary to being useful, that patience was a virtue rather than a wound she was inflicting on herself. She had been wrong about so many things, and she had believed their lie about her body. That was what sat deepest in the hollow that had opened in her chest. Not the rejection itself, not even the public nature of it, but the fact that she had stood in that hall and heard the word, and her first response had been shame. She had believed it immediately, completely, without question. She had not stood up and said, That cannot be true. She had gone to her knees and let it settle over her like something she had been carrying all along without knowing it. That she could not forgive herself for yet. She was still working through it when she became aware that the forest had changed around her. Not loudly. Not with any kind of announcement. A branch that had been angled toward her face had drawn back, slowly, without wind. A root that crossed the natural path of her hand had uncurled from that position as she reached for it, as if clearing the way. The rhythm of the forest's breathing had shifted too, still present, still steady, but oriented toward her now in a way that felt intentional rather than ambient. Then, from somewhere to her upper left, she heard a sound. Not footsteps. Whatever this was moved too deliberately for footsteps, with too much awareness of its own weight and the space it occupied. It was the sound of something that chose carefully where it put itself. Cassie turned her head. 20 feet away, standing in the gap between two enormous trunks, a man watched her. He was tall in the specific way that some people are tall, not just height, but proportion, as if the space around him had organized itself to accommodate him rather than the other way around. His hair was the silver of old coins, pulled back without ceremony. His features were sharp and precise, the kind of face that would have been described as beautiful if it had held any warmth, but it held something else instead. Something that had no simple name. His eyes caught the Ashwood's strange ambient light and reflected it back in a way that was nothing like human eyes and nothing like wolf eyes. He was dressed in dark material that moved slightly even without wind, settling around him as if it had its own preferences about how it fell. He was not moving toward her. He had not moved at all since she noticed him. He was simply there, watching, with the stillness of something that had been standing in the same spot for a long time before she turned around. She was too tired to be afraid of him. She noted that distantly, the absence of the fear response she would have expected. Her body had apparently reached capacity. "You've been here 6 hours," the man said. His voice was low and precise, every consonant placed where it belonged, nothing wasted. "The forest has been following you for 5 of them." Cassie looked at him steadily. Her face was still wet. She did not move to fix that. "Are you here to help me?" she said, "or to observe me?" His expression did not shift, but something behind it did. Something small and quick, there and gone, like a fish moving under still water. "I haven't decided," he said. And that, somehow, was the most honest answer anyone had given her all night. He had not moved closer. She had not moved away. This was, Cassie would think later, the entire first conversation between them in miniature. 2 people holding their positions, examining each other across a careful distance, neither willing to close it without understanding what closing it would mean. His name was Caspian Fenrir. He told her this without preamble, the way someone states a fact that is relevant rather than performing an introduction. Prince of the Duskhollow Court, the oldest Fey dominion on this side of what he called the Veil, the boundary between his world and the world she had always known. He sat across from her on a fallen trunk that had, Cassie was fairly certain, not been there a moment before he gestured toward it. She chose not to ask about that yet. "You've been searching for something," she said. Not a question. "For 11 years, he confirmed. "A bloodline. Something ancient that went missing from my world 3 generations back." His silver eyes moved across her with the focused attention of someone taking a precise inventory. A convergence line, half wolf, half fey. Cassie was quiet for a moment. "And you believe I am that?" "I know you are," he said. "I can see it. Your examiners could not. Wolf diagnostic methods cannot detect Fey resonance. They were looking for the wrong signature entirely. She processed this with the deliberate care of someone who had been given a great deal of wrong information in a single evening and was running out of room to store it. "What you're describing," she said slowly, "would mean the examination they used tonight was incapable of telling them anything accurate about me." "That is correct. It would mean the verdict was false. In the most important sense, yes." She looked at her hands, then back at him. "But it wasn't just incompetence," she said. "Was it?" Caspian was quiet for exactly the length of time it took her to know she was right. "The healer who conducted the examination," he said carefully, "has been connected to a debt for 4 years, owed to a woman in your court named Gundred." Cassie's blood went cold. It moved through her slowly. The understanding, the way cold moves through something that has been warm for a long time. It had to displace the warmth first before it could settle. Gundred, Ignis's mother. The Dowager Luna, with her silver hair and her patient, courteous smile, and her habit of entering rooms just before Cassie and leaving them just after, as if measuring the space Cassie occupied and recording the dimensions. "What kind of debt?" Cassie said. Her voice came out steady. She was distantly proud of it. "The kind," Caspian said, "that requires silence." She sat with that for a long time. Around them, the Ashwood breathed its steady, alien rhythm, and the trees held their positions, and nothing moved except the very slight settling of Caspian's dark clothing in the windless air. Then she straightened her spine, because she was the kind of person who straightened her spine when the ground moved beneath her, rather than going still and waiting for it to stop. "You want something from me," she said. "Yes." "Then say it plainly." He did. That was the first thing she truly respected about him. He did not soften it, did not dress it in flattery or approach it sideways. Fey law, he explained, required that any bargain involving a person of convergence blood be spoken in full, every term clear, both parties understanding exactly what was offered and what was asked. He could not simply take what he needed. He could not use what she carried without her agreement. What he needed and what he asked for was this. She would come to the Duskhollow Court. She would remain there under his protection, and she would carry his heirs, because her body, built as it was for Fey resonance rather than wolf bloodlines, was the only vessel capable of anchoring what Caspian's lineage required. In return, she would receive protection from everything that had just discarded her, a title within his court, access to the truth about her own bloodline, and power she had not yet imagined the shape of. Cassie listened to every word without interrupting. When he finished, she asked, "If I say no?" "You remain in this forest," he said. "The Ashwood will not harm you. It has already decided it has no interest in that. But the Wolf Kingdom will send scouts by morning. They will find you before midday." She looked around at the dark trees, the breathing stillness, the roots that continued their subtle, courteous adjustments whenever she shifted position. She had been left in this forest to disappear. The forest had, apparently, declined to cooperate with that intention. "The heirs you want me to carry," she said. "You would bind me to that. My body, my time, I cannot bind you to anything," he interrupted. "That is precisely what Fey law prevents. Every term I have named must be agreed to freely, or it holds no force." His eyes were steady on hers. "I am not offering you a cage. I am offering you a trade. You decide its value." Cassie looked at him for a long moment. At this man who had appeared in an ancient forest 6 hours after her world ended, and was now sitting across from her on a tree that had materialized for the purpose, outlining the terms of her future with the calm specificity of someone who had planned this conversation carefully and intended it to be honest. "One condition," she said. He waited. "I decide who I become inside your world. Not you. Not the court. Not the bargain." She held his gaze. "I am not arriving to be shaped into something more convenient. Whatever I become, it comes from me." Something moved in his expression, slow and subtle, a shift that she did not yet have the language to read correctly. Not offense, not dismissal. Something else. "I would not know how to shape you," he said. "You appear to already be fully formed." She extended her hand. He took it. The moment their palms connected, she felt something. Not painful, not frightening, but real, the way temperature is real. A warmth beneath the skin of his hand that was not body heat. Something older than body heat, and for just a second, a pulse in her own chest that was not quite her heartbeat, as if something in her had recognized something in him and was responding to it the way a door responds to its own key. She did not mention it. She filed it away instead, the way she filed everything, carefully, in the back of her mind, where it would wait until she was ready to examine it. As they rose to leave, he stopped her with a quiet word. "There is something else you should know." She turned. "Your mother's maternal line," he said. 3 generations back, a woman left the Duskhollow Court. She left without documentation, without permission, and she vanished into the mortal world. A pause. "Our records list her disappearance as unresolved." His eyes held hers. She did not disappear. She chose a wolf, and she carried the convergence line forward into your bloodline, dormant until now. Cassie stared at him. "Your blood," he said quietly, "was never wrong. It was never lesser. It was simply waiting to be somewhere it was recognized." She turned away before he could see what that did to her face. She walked forward into the dark of the Ashwood, and Caspian Fenrir walked beside her, and somewhere behind them, the silver boundary held its line, and the wolf kingdom kept its torches, burning and did not know what it had just let go. Crossing through the veil was nothing like walking through a door. It was closer to being pressed flat. All at once, the way a sound is pressed flat when something enormous moves over it. Not painful, not damaging, but total. For a fraction of a second, Cassie ceased to be a thing that existed in any particular place, and then she existed again, and the place was entirely different. The sky was wrong. Not frighteningly wrong. Simply wrong in the way that a familiar song played in a different key is wrong. The color was deeper than any sky she had seen, layered in shades of blue and violet that did not correspond to any hour she recognized, and the light came from somewhere that was not a sun. It was softer than sunlight, more diffuse, and it came from every direction at once, which should have been disorienting, and was instead, strangely, restful. The Duskhollow Court rose from the face of a cliff ahead of her. Not built against it, grown from it. That was the only word that fit. Black stone and silver-veined rock, shaped into terraces and spires and archways, all of it organic in the way that rock formations are organic, as if the cliff had agreed to become this over a very long period of time, and the Fae had simply guided the process. Warm amber light glowed from within its windows, the kind of light that in the Wolf Kingdom would have meant candles or fires, but here seemed to have a different origin entirely. Climbing vines with silver leaves traced every outer wall, their leaves catching the ambient light and releasing it again softly, so that the whole structure breathed with a quiet luminescence. Cassie stood at the base of the approach path and looked at it. She had expected something intimidating, something designed to make visitors feel small. This did not feel like that. This felt like a place that had decided for itself what it wanted to be without consulting anyone's expectations. She found, to her own surprise, that she didn't hate it. The court members knew Caspian had returned. They appeared in the way that people appear when they have been waiting, emerging from doorways and stairwells and upper walkways, gathering without assembling, watching without crowding. Cassie walked the approach path at Caspian's left and felt every pair of eyes in the structure shift toward her. Their reactions were varied and immediate. A tall fae near the main entrance looked at her with open curiosity, head tilting slightly the way birds tilt their heads at new things. Two others at the top of a carved stone staircase exchanged a rapid, silent look. An older woman with white-streaked hair folded her hands at her waist and watched with an expression of careful neutrality that Cassie recognized from her years in the Wolf Court, the expression of someone who had decided nothing yet and intended to make that ambiguity last as long as possible. And then there was the copper-haired woman standing at the far edge of the main courtyard, whose expression had decided everything immediately. She was striking, tall, precise in her posture, wearing something dark and draped that moved with the same quiet intention as Caspian's clothing. Her eyes moved from Caspian to Cassie's face, and then she leaned toward the woman beside her and said, in a carrying voice that was clearly intended to carry, "She smells like grief and wolf territory." How charming. Cassie heard it. She turned her head and found the copper-haired woman's gaze across the courtyard and held it. She did not respond. She simply looked, steadily, without blinking, until the woman was the one who looked away. A small, dry voice appeared at her left elbow. "Do not mind, Valerie." Cassie turned to find a man she had not noticed approaching, shorter than the others, with clever dark eyes, and the posture of someone who spent a great deal of time being comfortable in uncomfortable rooms. He wore simple, well-made, dark clothing, and held a leather-bound book under one arm, as if he had been interrupted in the middle of reading it. "She considers skepticism a character virtue," the man continued, falling into step beside her, as if he had always been walking there. "She's not entirely wrong, in principle. Her method is somewhat aggressive." "I've worked with aggressive skeptics," Cassie said. "They're manageable." "Are they?" He sounded genuinely interested, rather than politely curious. "Bastian, Kyle," he offered. "Court advisor. I find most things interesting, which is either my greatest strength or the reason no one gives me a direct assignment." "Cassie Valor," she said. "Yes," Bastian agreed. "I know who you are. The entire court does. We have been expecting you in the broad sense for approximately 11 years. He paused. "The specific version of you, the one who appears on this particular evening, is newer information." She looked at him sideways. "You're going to tell me things Caspian doesn't know you're telling me." "I'm going to answer your questions honestly," he said, without any particular emphasis, which is a slightly different thing. But close. The healer's chambers were on the court's east side, behind a wooden door carved with spiraling patterns that seemed to move if she looked at them directly, and resolved into stillness when she looked away. The healer herself was already inside when Bastian brought Cassie to her, a small woman with bright, quick eyes, and the manner of someone who had run out of patience for softening things approximately 2 decades ago, and had not missed the habit since. Her name was Lorelei McGraw. She introduced herself, gestured for Cassie to sit, and began the examination without delay. It was gentler than Cassie expected. Lorelei's hands were light and careful, her movements economical, everything in service of gathering information rather than demonstration. She did not explain what she was doing as she did it, which Cassie recognized as the behavior of someone so focused on the work that speaking during it would cost something. She waited. When Lorelei finished, she pulled her hands back and looked at Cassie with those bright, direct eyes. "You are not Barren," she said. 3 words. Cassie heard them from somewhere slightly outside herself, as if the information had arrived, but her mind needed a moment to locate where it belonged. "Say that again," Cassie said. "You are not Barren," Lorelei repeated, exactly as clearly as the first time, because she was the kind of woman who didn't soften a repetition. "Your body is completely capable of carrying children. Your womb carries a fey resonance so strong that a wolf pregnancy would be impossible. Not because anything in you is deficient or damaged, but because your body knows what it is designed for, and it is not designed for wolf bloodlines. It would reject one naturally, every time, the way the wrong key rejects a lock. Not broken, just wrong key." The silence in the room had a specific texture. Cassie sat inside it and let her mind do what it needed to do with what she had just been told. "The examination they used on me," she said finally. "It wasn't capable of reading that." "No," Lorelei said. "Wolf diagnostic methods look for wolf-compatible fertility markers. What you have is something entirely different. To their instruments, it simply registered as absent, a false negative. And if someone had known that in advance—" Cassie stopped. Lorelei waited. "If someone had known that the examination could not give an accurate result, they could have predicted what verdict it would return. Before the examination even happened." Lorelei's expression held something careful and particular. "That is a correct observation," she said. Cassie looked at her hands, resting flat on her thighs. She thought about Gundred, about the particular quality of Gundred's courteous smiles over 3 years of Sunday morning breakfasts in the Haskins family wing. About the way Gundred had once, very casually, asked Cassie which healer she preferred for her annual health appointments, and Cassie had mentioned Renwick without thinking, and Gundred had nodded with the satisfied expression of someone who had just confirmed something she already knew. She thought about the debt Caspian had mentioned. 4 years. Renwick, connected to Gundred for 4 years. She had been in that family wing for 3. They had planned this before she arrived. "She didn't make this happen because of something I did," Cassie said slowly. "She made this happen because of something I am." Lorelei did not answer that directly, but her expression shifted, just slightly, toward something that, in another face, might have been admiration. "Rest," Lorelei said. "There is more to understand, but you have processed enough for 1 evening." After Lorelei left, Cassie sat alone in the warm, amber-lit room and looked at the wall and let the complete weight of it settle over her. She had believed their lie. She had believed it in the very first second, without resistance, without even the reflex of doubt. She had heard the word and gone to her knees as if it were simply the truth and she was accepting its gravity. She would not do that again. Whatever came next, whatever the Duskhollow Court and Caspian Fenrir and the strange doubled world she had stepped into would require of her, she would not accept another verdict she had not examined herself. She would not carry another person's construction of who she was as if it were her own. She pressed her palms flat against the stone wall and felt, beneath the cool surface, the faint pulse of something old and patient. The wall recognized her. She recognized it back. Days moved differently inside the Duskhollow Court. Not slower, not faster. but with a quality that Cassie, who had always measured time by urgency, found genuinely disorienting. Time here seemed to move according to what was happening inside it, rather than by any external standard. A morning spent reading in the court library felt like a morning. An afternoon in the stone corridors, asking Bastian questions and receiving answers that reliably contained more than she had asked for, felt like an afternoon. Nothing dragged. Nothing rushed. She was aware that this was not neutral, that she was being given space deliberately, that Caspian was not pressing her toward anything in those first days, that the access she had to the court's libraries and gardens and corridors was a kind of language she was only beginning to learn to read. She did not mistake it for generosity without purpose. She observed it and filed it in the part of her mind that had always been better at watching than most people assumed. She explored everything. The library alone was 3 floors of shelving carved directly into the cliff face, the upper levels accessible by staircases that adjusted their incline based on what she was carrying, which she discovered by accident on the second morning when she was holding a heavy volume and the stairs in front of her became noticeably less steep. She spent 4 hours on that first library visit and returned every day after. She read about convergence bloodlines. She read about the history of the Duskhollow Court, which was older than the Wolf Kingdom by several centuries. She read about the treaty system between Fey dominions and mortal territories, the agreements and obligations, the clauses and exceptions, the particular language used to describe what happened when those obligations were not honored. She found a clause she recognized immediately. She read it 3 times, slowly. Then she carefully marked the page and closed the book and sat with what she had found for a long time. Bastian appeared, as Bastian reliably did, at the moment most useful to him and least expected by her. "The treaty clause?" she said, without turning around. "Ah," he said, settling into the chair to her left. "You found it. How long has Caspian known it was violated?" Bastian considered. "He has known a treaty existed for 11 years, he said. "He has known it was buried rather than honored for approximately the same period. The documentation proving it, the paper trail, the sealed correspondence that has been accumulating for the past several months." A pause. "He did not begin collecting it until he knew where you were." Cassie turned to look at him. "He collected evidence of what was done to me before he found me." "He collected evidence of what was done to the convergence line," Bastian said, carefully but without evasion. "Which, yes, is you." She was quiet for a moment. The treaty required that any convergence-born individual in Haskin's territory be granted safe passage to this court. "Upon discovery, yes. I was born 6 months after it was signed. Yes. They knew then." She said it flatly, the way a person states a fact they have been sitting with for 10 minutes and have fully digested. "From the time I was an infant, the Haskins bloodline knew what I was." "Ignis's father, yes," Bastian said. "What Ignis himself was told and when, that is less clear. His mother is a more active keeper of inconvenient information." Cassie looked at the book on the table in front of her. Then at the library around her, the carved shelves, the amber light in the reading lamps, the quiet weight of a place that had been keeping knowledge for centuries. "I need air," she said. She went to the threshold garden. It was Caspian's private garden. She had gathered that from Bastian without him ever explicitly saying it, the way she gathered most things about this court. A courtyard set into the cliff face's natural concave, stone walls on 3 sides, open on the 4th to the dusk-hollow sky. Silver-leafed trees grew in clusters around a reflecting pool that sat at the garden's center, its surface perfectly still, The sky above it was the same shifting violet blue she had woken to on her first morning here. But the pool reflected something different, a pale gold that did not correspond to anything overhead. She did not ask about the pool. She already suspected the answer was something fey that would require a great deal of additional context to understand properly, and she was working through a great deal of additional context as it was. She reached for a book on the shelf nearest her. She had carried one from the library without thinking, and as her fingers closed on the spine, the shelf lit up. It was not alarming, exactly. A soft gold ripple moved outward from the point of contact between her fingertips and the wood, spreading across the shelf in a slow wave, lingering on the spines of each book it reached before fading. She pulled her hand back. The light settled. She stared at her own fingers. Third time this week. She turned. Bastian was leaning against the garden entrance, arms folded, expression attentive but not startled. "You've been counting," she said. "Caspian asked me to," he said. "He wants to understand the rate of progression." "The rate of what, exactly?" Bastian walked forward and stopped a few feet away. "Your bloodline is doing what bloodlines do when they arrive somewhere they recognize," he said. "It is waking up. Slowly, in stages, in the way that things wake up when they have been dormant for 3 generations. Carefully at first, testing the ground." He nodded toward the shelf. "The court's magic responds to you because you carry a resonance it knows. You were made for this place, in the literal ancestral sense, and the place knows it." Cassie looked at the shelf, then back at her hand. "I don't feel different," she said. "No," he agreed. "You wouldn't yet. It's early." He looked at her with something she was beginning to recognize as his version of warmth, which was drier and quieter than most people's warmth, but no less real for it. "But it's there." She was still standing in the garden, turning that over in her mind, when she became aware that she was no longer alone. Caspian was standing at the garden's entrance, the same spot Bastian had occupied, as if the entrance was the place people chose when they wanted to be present without imposing. He was watching her with the same focused attention she had first encountered in the Ashwood, that careful inventory-taking quality, except that it had changed in some way she could not immediately name. Less assessment now. Something else. "You weren't here to observe the shelf," he said. "No," she said. "I was here to think." "I can leave." She considered him. "You can stay," she said. He came forward and stopped at the pool's edge, standing at a right angle to her, both of them looking at the reflecting water. The silence between them was not awkward. She was noticing that their silences had a specific texture, different from other silences. They had weight without tension. They allowed things to be unspoken without those things becoming uncomfortable. "You found the treaty clause," he said. "Did Bastian tell you?" "No. You were in the section of the library that holds treaty documents. It was not difficult to follow the logic." She looked at the pool. "Ignis's father signed it. Ignis buried it." "Yes. Do you know whether Ignis understood what he was burying?" Caspian was quiet for a moment. "Genuinely?" "No. I have my suspicions about what he was told and what he understood, but I was not present for those conversations." Another pause. "I have not wanted to examine his culpability too closely, because my relationship with his culpability is not objective." Cassie turned to look at him. He said it without self-consciousness, this admission that he was too angry to be fair about it. She found that more honest than any version of the same thought dressed in neutrality. "What were you told about me?" she said, "before you found me?" that a convergence-born individual was living in Haskins' territory, that they were being kept there, effectively, by the treaty violation, because no one had told them what they were, or come for them, or given them any reason to leave. His eyes met hers. I was told nothing about who you were as a person, only what you carried. And now? He did not look away. Now I find that the distinction is becoming less useful than I expected. That was not a simple statement. Cassie understood it was not simple. She let it sit between them without pressing it into a shape it wasn't ready to hold. "You are not what I expected," she said. "No," he agreed. "You have told me that before. You're not trying to manage me. No. Most people in positions of power try to manage the things that might affect them. Most people in positions of power," he said, "have not spent 11 years looking for something they could not find by conventional means. It changes the relationship with control." He looked at the pool. "I have controlled every element of this court for 40 years. You are the first thing in it that I cannot categorize, cannot predict, and cannot adjust." He turned to her. "I find that I do not want to." Cassie held his gaze and felt something in her chest adjust. Not the hollow that had been there since the rejection, not the anger that had taken up residence where the hurt used to be, but something else. Something smaller and newer and considerably more dangerous. She thought about what Lorelei had told her, the twin pulses, the two lives beginning, so early, so quietly, inside her. She had not told Caspian yet. She was still sitting with that information herself, turning it over, holding it up to different lights, but standing in the threshold garden, in the strange, beautiful violet light of the Duskhollow sky, with the silver trees breathing around them and the pool holding its impossible gold reflection, she felt it more clearly than she had in the healer's chambers. Two small, steady pulses. Present. Real. Undeniable. She pressed one hand lightly against her abdomen, not thinking about it, just the reflex of someone acknowledging something that was there. Caspian's gaze dropped to her hand. Something crossed his expression, fast and careful, and then deliberately stilled. "How long have you known?" he said quietly. 2 days, she said. A silence. "And you didn't." "I was still deciding what to do with it," she said. "I needed to understand it myself before I gave it to anyone else." He nodded once, slowly, as if he understood that completely, which she suspected he did. "Are you afraid?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "No," she said, surprised, still adjusting. She looked at her hand, but not afraid. "Good," he said. His voice was quieter than usual. "Neither am I." That night, Lorelei found her in the corridor outside her chambers with an expression that was careful and bright in equal measure. "The resonance is stronger today than yesterday," Lorelei said without preamble. "I know," Cassie said. "Do you feel them?" Cassie stopped walking. She turned inward, the way she was learning to turn inward, not searching exactly, more like listening in a direction she was still new at pointing herself. And there they were. 2 pulses, steady and distinct, not hers but connected to hers, like 2 flames lit from the same match, burning at their own rates. "Both of them," she said. Lorelei's bright eyes softened into something that was, for her, the equivalent of a broad smile. "Extraordinarily well," she said. "Both of them." 300 miles away, in a stronghold full of torchlight and iron certainty, Ignis Haskins sat at the center of a council chamber and failed for the 3rd consecutive morning to begin the meeting. The room was full. Dorian Riker sat to his left, his general, his beta, the man who had served the Haskins bloodline since before Ignis could carry a sword, whose loyalty was not the flattering kind that bent to what a king wanted to hear. Dorian's loyalty was the inconvenient kind, the kind that told you things. Dorian had been telling him things for 3 days. The scouts had not returned. 3 warriors sent into the Ashwood's edge to confirm the exile. Standard protocol, a verification that the boundary had been crossed and the exile was complete. 3 warriors who had entered at the eastern tree line on the night of the blood moon ceremony and had not come out the other side. They could have gone deeper than instructed, Ignis said. They were given very specific distance parameters, Dorian said. Harlan Voss helped draft them. He does not misunderstand instructions. Then the forest. The forest has been eating wolves for centuries, Dorian said. Every wolf who enters the Ashwood without preparation. These were prepared men. He paused, or something in there has changed. Ignis looked at the table. The council sat in careful silence around him, all of them watching him the way people watched a man they were not certain of yet, waiting to see which version of him would settle into the seat. He had been awake for most of 3 nights. It was not guilt, he told himself. He had made the decision that the kingdom required. The blood moon examination protocol existed for a reason. A Luna who could not produce heirs created a succession crisis, created weakness, created exactly the kind of fracture that neighboring clans would exploit. He had done what an Alpha King did. He had protected the line. But the line had also been empty next to him for 3 nights, and whatever he was feeling about that, he could not seem to organize it into a shape that felt like certainty. Something was wrong in the Ashwood. He could not feel the bond. It was gone. He had severed it himself, and good, that was correct. That was necessary. But there was something else. A low, persistent pull at the edge of his awareness, like a sound heard from several rooms away that he could not locate the source of. He looked up. Gundred had entered the chamber through the side door, the one that connected the council wing to the family apartments. She moved with the unhurried grace of a woman who had decided, somewhere in her early life, that rushing was for people who had not yet understood how things worked. She was dressed in the silver and grey of a dowager Luna, her pale hair immaculate, her expression warm and concerned, in the precise amount that suggested she had calibrated it on the way here. "You should rest," she said to him. "You have been carrying this unnecessarily." Dorian said nothing. Ignis noticed that Dorian said nothing, the precise, deliberate quality of his silence. "Harlan Voss is missing," Ignis said. "The Ashwood is unpredictable," Gundred said smoothly. "Harlan Voss has served in this court for 8 years. Ignis looked at her steadily. "He is not the kind of man the Ashwood takes." Something moved across Gundred's face. A flash, brief and quickly covered, like a card removed from the table before anyone could note its suit. "You are looking for complications where there are none," she said. "The girl is gone. The kingdom is stable. The succession, what she carried," Ignis said. Gundred stopped. "I heard you," he said. "In the corridor outside the family wing, 3 days ago. You were speaking to Renwick." He watched her face carefully. "You said what she carried was never meant to be found by them. Who is them, Mother?" The council room was very quiet. Gundred's expression had not broken. But it had. Ignis had been watching the faces of people who were hiding things since he was old enough to sit in council chambers, and he knew the difference between someone who did not understand a question and someone who was deciding how much of an answer to give. "You are not yourself," she said. "This is grief speaking." "It is not grief," Ignis said. His voice was very calm, the calmness of a man who had decided to get to the bottom of something and had enough control to move at the right pace. "Dorian, I need you to find out who appointed Renwick to the Healer's Circle. Dorian was already writing. That afternoon, alone in his private rooms, Ignis stood at the window that faced east, toward the silver boundary, toward the dark mass of the Ashwood, toward whatever was in that forest that had changed in the days since the blood moon. The pull was stronger tonight, not the bond. He knew what the bond felt like, had known it in its living form for 3 years, recognized it in its absence now. This was not that. This was something else, something that had been faint for 3 days and was gradually, unmistakably, becoming louder. He pressed his hand against the window frame and stared at the dark line of the trees. What did she carry? Inside the Duskhollow Court, Cassie stood in the main reception hall and faced Valerie. The encounter had the particular atmosphere of something that had been scheduled by one party and ambushed onto the other. Valerie had appeared in the corridor as Cassie was returning from the library, and the direction of her approach had made it immediately clear that she had been waiting for this moment rather than stumbling into it. "I want to be plain with you," Valerie said. "Please," Cassie said. "You are wolf-born. You carry Fey blood, yes. Lorelei's assessment is not something I dispute. But you know nothing of this court's customs, this world's politics, or the position you have been placed into by Caspian's decision." Valerie's copper hair was immaculate, her posture a weapon. "The court's tolerance of your presence is political. It is not warmth. You should not mistake one for the other." Cassie looked at her without expression for a moment. "Are you done?" Valerie's eyes narrowed. "I beg your pardon?" "I asked if you were done," Cassie said, in the same tone she would have used to ask someone to pass a book. "I want to make sure you've finished before I respond." Valerie said nothing, which Cassie took as a yes. "You're right that I don't know this court's customs yet," Cassie said. "I've been here less than a week. What I do know is Wolf Court politics, which is not so different from what I'm observing here. The same positioning, the same measurement of everyone against everyone else, the same performance of confidence used to cover the same underlying fear." She paused. "You're afraid of what I represent. I understand that. New things are frightening when you've spent a long time understanding exactly how your world is arranged." Valerie's jaw had tightened. "You are in no position to lecture me." "I'm not lecturing," Cassie said. "I'm observing. There's a difference." She kept her voice even. "You are better than cruelty dressed as honesty, Valerie. I don't know you well enough to say much about you with certainty, but I suspect that's true." The corridor was very quiet. "Caspian chose you," Valerie said, after a long pause. Something in her voice had shifted, still tight, still controlled, but different underneath. "He has never chosen anyone." "I know," Cassie said quietly. "Do you understand what that means? What it costs him to choose?" Cassie looked at her. "No," she said honestly. "Not yet. But I intend to find out." Something in Valerie's expression moved, not softening exactly, but adjusting, the way a position adjusts when the ground shifts beneath it, and the person holding it decides, pragmatically, to move with it rather than fall. She did not become friendly. She became something that, with patience and time, might eventually be useful. Bastian materialized at Cassie's elbow as Valerie walked away. "I owe you an apology," he said. "For what?" "I told you she might become your most useful ally or sharpest critic," he said. "I may have underestimated the timeline." Cassie looked at him sideways. "How many people in this court are afraid of what I represent?" He considered this with his characteristic honest attention. "Most of them," he said. "But fear and resentment are different things. Most of them are afraid in the way that people are afraid of an earthquake. not personally, but aware that what they know is about to be rearranged. He paused. The ones who resent you specifically are fewer, and they are not afraid of you. They are afraid of being made irrelevant by you. Is there a difference? Cassie asked. An enormous one, Bastian said. Frightened people can be reasoned with. People afraid of irrelevance cannot, because what you would have to do to reassure them is become less. Cassie thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. Bastian arrived before dawn. She heard the quiet knock and was already awake. She had not been sleeping much, and the Duskhollow Court moved with enough ambient sound in its walls and floors that she had learned to read the difference between the court's natural overnight rhythms and something purposeful approaching. This was purposeful. He carried a leather-bound folder. He sat down across from her at the small table near the window and placed it between them, and did not immediately speak, which told her more than the folder itself did. "Caspian sent you," she said. "Yes." He could have brought it himself. "He believed you should be able to read it without him in the room," Bastian said. "He thought that was what you would prefer." Cassie looked at the folder. Then she picked it up and opened it. The first document was Renwick's debt record, a formal accounting, in Fey script with a translation beneath it, of every obligation the healer owed to a creditor listed as G. Doolin Haskins. She recognized the double surname. The Doolin name was Gundred's family of origin, before her marriage into the Haskins bloodline. The document spanned 4 years and 14 separate entries. The final entry was dated 6 weeks before the blood moon ceremony. She set it aside. The second document was a selection of correspondence, letters, transcribed in a careful hand onto clean pages, with notes in the margins identifying their provenance. She recognized the phrasing in the first letter immediately, the formal, measured language of a woman who had spent decades ensuring that nothing she said could be construed as a command. Gundred had written to Renwick, over 4 years, about Cassie. The letters never used her name directly. They referred to her as the candidate in the earlier correspondence, and later, with Gundred's particular talent for language that sounded like one thing and meant another, as the matter requiring management. One letter, dated approximately 18 months ago, read, "The timing of the ceremony will be at the Alpha's discretion, but I would encourage you to ensure the healer's circle is prepared well in advance. The examination must be unambiguous. Any ambiguity in the results would create complications that none of us are positioned to manage gracefully." Cassie read that letter twice. Then she read the rest without stopping, without looking up, without giving herself the option of setting any of it aside before she had the complete picture. She had learned that the dangerous thing was not the truth. The dangerous thing was the partial truth, the kind you stopped reading before it was fully assembled. At the bottom of the folder was a document she recognized immediately from the treaty clause she had found in the library. It was the original. The paper was older, heavier, bearing 2 seals, the Haskins bloodline mark in Wolf Clan red, and beside it, the Duskhollow Court seal in silver that had the same quality as everything in this court, as if it had been pressed into the paper rather than applied to it. Signed by both parties, 11 years ago, with a clause, there in the middle of the 3rd page, that named the Convergence bloodline specifically, that named the obligation clearly, that used language which, in the treaty reading section of the library's 3rd floor, was described as binding in the strongest category of Fey law. Cassie closed the folder. She sat with her hands flat on the table and breathed slowly, the way she breathed when she needed to stay level rather than let herself be swept somewhere she had not chosen to go. She thought about the morning of the blood moon ceremony. She had been getting dressed for 3 hours. She had sat in front of her mirror and pinned her hair with silver thread and examined her own reflection for signs of the woman she was trying to become. Worthy, steady, ready for whatever standing beside Ignis required. She had looked at herself and tried to feel the certainty she had always imagined would come eventually. She had not felt certain. She had felt careful, which was the closest she had found. They had been building this for years before that morning. Years. While she was learning which tea Ignis preferred, and how his shoulders moved before difficult meetings, and how to position herself in a room so that her presence was useful without being intrusive. The whole careful architecture of being a good Luna, of being enough. Gundred had been writing letters. She had believed their lie inside her body like it was her own truth. She would not make that mistake again. "I need paper," she said. Bastian produced it from somewhere on his person. She was no longer surprised by his preparedness, along with a pen. She wrote quickly, not rushing but not hesitating, a note addressed to Caspian that asked 3 specific questions about the treaty documentation and what legal mechanism existed within Fey law for addressing a violation of its terms. "Give him this," she said. Bastian took it. At the door, he paused. "How are you?" he asked. The question was simple and direct, which was his signature. She gave it the honest answer it deserved. "Angry," she said. "Clearly. And?" She looked at the closed folder on the table, relieved in a way that disturbs me. Because if it was done to me, it means it was never true, and I have been carrying the weight of something that was never true. She met Bastian's eyes. It would have been easier if it was just incompetence. Incompetence is impersonal. "Yes," Bastian said quietly. "This is extremely personal." "Which means," Cassie said, "I have to decide what to do with it. And that requires more clarity than anger alone can provide." He nodded once and left. 3 hours later, in the Wolf Kingdom, Ignis laid 2 pieces of paper on the table between himself and Gundred. The first was Renwick's original examination notes, the ones Dorian had located in the secondary record room, filed under a mislabeled category, the handwriting careful and the findings the opposite of the ones read aloud at the Blood Moon ceremony. The second was Renwick's amended notes, the ones that matched the public verdict, both dated the same day, both bearing Renwick's seal, both in his handwriting. Gundred looked at the papers. She did not look surprised. She looked like a woman deciding, very quickly, how much of the truth was still containable. "I acted in the kingdom's interest," she said. "You decided what the kingdom's interest was," Ignis said. His voice did not rise. It had the specific texture of something very controlled, not because he lacked feeling, but because the feeling was too large for loudness. "Without consulting me, without giving me the option of making my own choice with accurate information. You would not have made the right choice. That," he said, "was mine to make." Gundred's composure held. It was extraordinary, in its way. She had built it over decades, that composure, stone by stone, and it did not crack now. But it stopped being a tool and became a barricade instead, and he could see the difference. "She is Fey-blooded," Ignis said. It was not a question. He had found that in the secondary records too, a notation in Renwick's original notes, quickly, almost as if he had added it before he remembered he was supposed to erase this version. "That was what you were managing." Silence. "The treaty father signed," he said. "The one you told me was never formally ratified." Her eyes moved, just slightly. "Dorian found the ratification documents this morning," Ignis said, "in the archive room that has been under your administrative oversight for 11 years. The silence had a new quality now. He stood up. You will remain in the family apartments under escort until I determine what accountability looks like for this, he said. Not punishment yet. Accountability. There is a difference. He turned to Dorian, who had been standing at the door with the particular patience of a man who had expected this conversation, and was glad, finally, to be inside it rather than approaching it. Prepare a delegation, Ignis said. Small. No more than 4. And Dorian, I need the original treaty document, the actual original, not a copy. For what purpose? Dorian said. Ignis looked at the window. East, the Ashwood, the boundary. Because I intend to request a conversation, he said, and I will not arrive empty-handed. That evening, in the threshold garden, Cassie and Caspian stood on either side of the reflecting pool, the violet sky above them, and the amber light of the court at their backs. She had read his responses to her 3 questions, thorough, precise, exactly what she had needed them to be. She had written back once. He had come in person. They had been standing in this garden for 20 minutes, talking about treaty law, and it had gradually, so gradually it was almost invisible, become something else. You built this garden yourself, she said. He looked slightly caught. What makes you say that? Because it doesn't feel designed, she said. It feels decided. Everything in the court feels designed, considered, deliberate, made with an intention. This feels like something someone made because they needed a place. She looked around. Not for any purpose, just a place. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. When? Another pause. A long time ago. When the court felt very full and I needed somewhere, it was not. She looked at him. He was looking at the pool. The pool held its impossible gold reflection, regardless of what moved above it. You've been alone a long time, she said. He did not answer immediately. Not because it was wrong. She could tell from the quality of his stillness that it was not wrong. Because he was deciding whether to let it simply be stated or whether to add something to it. I have been surrounded, he said finally. A court is always full of people. Advisors, courtiers, representatives, petitioners. I have not lacked for presence. A pause. But yes, I have been alone in the specific sense that you mean. Cassie looked at the pool. So have I, she said. For 3 years I was surrounded by people and completely alone. She paused. At least you had a garden. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Too brief, too controlled, but it had the texture of one. You can have it too, he said. It appears to like you. The garden or the pool? Both, I suspect. He looked at the shelf where the light had responded to her earlier in the week. Everything in this court that is old enough to remember what it was built for responds to you. It has been doing so since the first morning. She looked at her hands. It's strange, she said quietly, to be recognized by a place. I keep expecting to feel like an outsider, and I keep not. Because you are not one, he said. Simple, not reassuring, stating. She turned to look at him. He was watching her the way he had watched her from the beginning, with that focused, inventory-taking attention, except that what it was taking inventory of had changed. He was not measuring what she carried anymore. He was noticing what she was. She thought about what Valerie had asked her. Do you understand what it costs him to choose? She thought about a man who had spent 40 years managing everything, and who had looked at her in an ancient forest and said, I haven't decided. Who had given her time instead of pressure. Who had sent Bastian with the folder so she could read it without being watched. Who had built this garden because sometimes he needed a place. Tell me something that had nothing to do with the bargain, she said. Something you thought or felt that was only yours. He looked at her for a long moment. When you said, "Get it over with," he said quietly, "in the Ashwood, before you knew who I was or what I wanted, you were afraid and exhausted and completely destroyed, and your first instinct was still to face me directly." He paused. "People who have given up do not face things. They turn away." His eyes held hers. "You were still fighting, even then. That was not strategy. That was—" The pause was brief but real, a man reaching for honest language about something he was not practiced at naming. The first time in a very long time I encountered something I was not able to predict, and I found that I didn't want the prediction. I wanted to see what you would do instead. Cassie held his gaze. "You're not good at this," she said, gently, honestly. "No," he agreed. "I am not." "Neither am I," she said. "The last time I trusted someone with something real, he ended it in 43 seconds in front of an audience." "I know." She took a breath. "So you understand why I need it to be true," she said, "before I let it be anything. It needs to be actually, specifically, honestly true." "It is true," he said, quietly, without performance. "I cannot tell you yet what it becomes. I am not a man who makes promises about things I do not fully understand. But what I feel when I am near you, that is not calculation. I have spent 40 years being calculating. I know the difference very well." She reached for his hand. Not dramatically. Not with decision moment weight or ceremony. Simply reaching. The way you reach for something you have decided not to wait for anymore. His hand was there, careful, warm, alive with that subtle, non-body heat that she had felt the first time they touched in the Ashwood and had been thinking about ever since. He closed his hand around hers, firm, certain, as if he had been holding this moment somewhere inside him for a while and was finally allowing it to be real. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. The garden breathed around them, silver leaves catching the amber light. He pressed his lips to her forehead first, soft, deliberate, not a beginning, an acknowledgement, like he was naming something that was already there. She leaned into it, just slightly, just enough. Then she tilted her face up and found his. The kiss was nothing like the mate bond had been, nothing like that warm, involuntary tide of something that arrived before. You could choose it. This was entirely chosen, deliberately and with full knowledge. Soft first, then deeper. His free hand came to the side of her face with the particular gentleness of someone handling something they consider valuable and are aware of. And she pressed her palm flat against his chest and felt his heart, steady and fast. It was not rescue. It was not transaction. It was not fate having an opinion about where either of them should be. It was two people, both of them damaged in quiet ways, both of them careful by long practice, choosing, in the full awareness of everything that had brought them here, to let something be real. When they separated, the garden was perfectly still around them. Even the pool had stopped moving. Bastian appeared at the entrance. "I am going to apologize in advance," he said, "for the timing of what I am about to say." Cassie and Caspian looked at him. "The Alpha King of the Haskins bloodline is at the Silver Boundary," Bastian said. "He has arrived with a small delegation. He has Gundred in custody." A pause. "He is asking, not demanding, a conversation." Cassie straightened. She felt Caspian's hand still in hers and she released it, not urgently, just with the awareness of what the next hour required. She thought about the twins, about their two steady pulses, one bright and silver fay, one warm and wolf-lit, different from each other, and both entirely hers. "Tell him," she said, "that the conversation happens when I decide it happens, and that I will be there at dawn." Dawn came in gold and grey at the silver boundary. The light moved differently here than inside the Duskhollow Court, harsher, more horizontal, less the ambient diffusion of the Fey realm, and more the direct early light of the mortal world, touching everything at an angle. Cassie stood at the boundary line and looked across it at the Wolf Kingdom side, where the stronghold's distant walls were just becoming visible in the growing light. Caspian stood at her left. Behind them, 6 Duskhollow guards, quiet, still, watchful, held their positions without drama. Bastian stood slightly farther back, near a boundary stone, with the air of a man who intended to observe everything and comment on very little. On the other side of the line, Ignis Haskins waited. He had brought 4 people. Dorian Riker, immediately recognizable, stood at his right shoulder with the bearing of a man who was prepared for whatever this conversation turned into, and had been prepared since before leaving the stronghold. 2 warriors flanked them, faces still, postures attentive without aggression, and behind Ignis, held between 2 of Dorian's guards with the particular, stiff grace of a woman who considered any situation recoverable. Gundred. Her composure was intact. It was always intact. But Cassie could see, across the boundary line, in the dawn light that spared nothing, the effort it was costing her. Ignis himself looked stripped. That was the only word for it. He was every physical thing he had always been. Tall, authoritative, carrying the particular gravity of a man built to lead rooms. But the certainty was gone. The expression she had memorized over 3 years, the closed, decided face of a king who always knew what the next move was. That was gone. In its place was something she had never seen on him before. The specific expression of a man who has been wrong in a way that cannot be undone and has decided, against every instinct that makes someone a ruler, to stand in the open with that. He looked at her across the boundary. She looked back at him. "You asked for a conversation," she said, her voice carried without raising it. "Say what you came to say." He did not use preamble. She respected that more than she expected to. He told her what Dorian had found, the original examination notes, the amended ones. The correspondence between Gundred and Renwick, some of which Dorian's investigators had located independently from the documentation Caspian's channels had already assembled. The treaty ratification document buried in the archive room under Gundred's administrative oversight for 11 years. He told her that he had not known the examination was falsified, that he had not known the treaty his father signed had been hidden from him, that he could not give her certainty about exactly when his mother's management of this situation had begun, and whether any part of it had been visible to him, and overlooked or completely hidden. "What I can tell you," he said, "is that I chose to trust what I was given, rather than look more carefully at what I had." His eyes held hers across the line. "That is not the same as what she did, but it is not innocent either. I am not standing here asking you to treat it as innocent." Cassie let that settle for a moment. "That is an explanation," she said. "I'm not yet certain it is an apology." "It is both," he said. "I understand that the apology is worth very little now. I am saying it anyway, because you deserve to hear it said plainly, without a room full of witnesses who need to see their alpha perform remorse. This is actual." She looked at him for a long time. "It means something," she said finally. "Not everything, but something." Dorian stepped forward. He carried a leather case, which he opened on the flat surface of the boundary stone between the 2 delegations. He placed a document inside it. She recognized the paper, the weight of it, even from this distance. The original treaty. Caspian stepped forward to examine it. He did not touch it immediately. He looked at the seal, the signatures, the date. Then he looked at Ignis. Your father understood what a convergence bloodline represented to both worlds, Caspian said. His voice was controlled, carefully, deliberately controlled, in the way that men who are very angry and have decided not to perform that anger control themselves. He honored the obligation by signing this. You allowed it to be erased. Ignis did not flinch. I know. 3 generations of women in one bloodline paid for that erasure, Caspian said. Cassie's great-grandmother chose to leave this court. She had that right. The right she did not have, the right no one had, was to ensure her descendants would never know what they were, or that they had somewhere they belonged. I know, Ignis said again. Then we renegotiate, Caspian said. New terms. Every obligation stated in clear language, witnessed by both parties, binding under Fey law. A clause requiring full disclosure to any convergence-born individual in Haskin's territory within 30 days of confirmation. An independent examination protocol that cannot be assigned to a healer with undisclosed obligations. Ignis looked at Cassie. Are you willing to be part of those negotiations? She looked at her hand resting on her abdomen, a gesture that had become natural now, an acknowledgement of the 2 lives she was carrying that had grown so present to her. She wondered sometimes how she had ever been unaware of them. For them, she said quietly. Not because anyone has earned that from me. For what they deserve to inherit. Ignis's gaze moved to her hand, then back to her face. Something shifted in his expression. Not the old recognition, not the mate-bond warmth that was gone and would not come back. Something newer and smaller and perhaps harder. The recognition of someone who has finally seen clearly what was in front of him the whole time. Gundred stepped forward from behind her guards. She moved with her characteristic composure, chin level, bearing precise, as if she were walking to a seat at the council table, rather than to the space between an Alpha King and the woman she had destroyed. Cassie, she began. Cassie turned to face her. Gundred gathered herself. There was something in it, something almost sympathetic, or would have been, if Cassie had not spent 4 days reading the letters. I want you to understand, she said. I acted from necessity. The political consequences of a Fey claim on the convergence line. You were afraid, Cassie said. Gundred stopped. I genuinely understand that, Cassie continued. Her voice was not raised. It was not cold. It was simply what it was. Direct, honest, without performance. What I cannot understand is how you looked at someone's life, at a real person standing in front of you every day for 3 years, and decided that person was the appropriate price of your fear. She tilted her head. That question isn't for me to answer. It belongs to you. I'd suggest you spend some time with it. She turned away. She did not watch what Dorian did with Gundred after that. The Wolf Kingdom would manage its own accountability. That story had never been hers. She heard Ignis's footsteps behind her, not following, just moving back toward his side of the line. Cassie. She stopped. She did not turn all the way. Just enough. You were. Extraordinary, he said. Simply. Without weight or performance. You always were. I failed to see it in time. A pause. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for all of it. She met his eyes. I know, she said. Not forgiveness, not bitterness, not the long, satisfying speech she had written and discarded 3 times in the hours before dawn. Just truth. Simple and final and sufficient. Goodbye, Ignis. She crossed back toward the Ashwood. Behind her, The silver boundary held its line. Above her, the sky was gold and grey and moving toward blue, the slow dawn completing itself. Ahead, the Ashwood's trees stood at their positions, breathing their patient rhythm, the silver-veined path through them already visible. Not as it had been on the night she was first brought here, but clear, open, an invitation rather than a warning. She walked through it. The Duskhollow Court appeared ahead through the tree line, its amber light visible from here, its cliff-face structure familiar now in the way that places become familiar when you have spent enough mornings learning their specific silences. She knew the sound the east wing made at dawn. She knew which staircase adjusted its angle for heavy loads. She knew that Bastian would have tea ready somewhere, and that Lorelei would find her before midday, and that the threshold garden would be exactly as they had left it, the pool holding its impossible gold reflection, the silver trees waiting with their particular patience. Caspian was standing at the court's entrance. He was not waiting at the gate. There was no performance of that, no anxious pacing, nothing staged. He was simply standing at the threshold in the early morning light, still dressed from the boundary meeting, watching the path she was walking up. His expression was composed and present, and, when she reached him, something else that she was beginning to know the shape of. "Done?" he asked. "Done," she said. He reached for her hand. She let him take it, and the contact did what it had always done. That warmth beneath his skin, not body heat, something older, something that recognized her and was recognized in return. "How do you feel?" he said. She took a genuine breath and gave the genuine answer. She felt lighter than she had in 3 years. She felt the twins, both pulses, steady and distinct, one bright and silver, one warm and wolf-lit, both entirely present and entirely hers. She felt the court at her back, old and patient, and entirely unhurried about her belonging to it. She felt Caspian's hand around hers, careful, certain, not possessing but accompanying. "Like I'm standing exactly where I should be," she said. He brought her hand to his lips, quiet, deliberate, the gesture of someone who had learned, the hard way, to let things be real when they were real. "Then stay," he said. She was already home. She had walked into the Ashwood with nothing left to lose. She walked out of it with everything worth keeping. Not because someone rescued her from what was taken. Not because fate corrected itself and offered her a second chance at the story she had expected. Because she walked through the darkest version of her own life and discovered, on the other side of it, that she was more than the names other people had given her. More than barren. More than discarded. More than the woman who had spent 3 years making herself small enough to be acceptable. The Duskhollow Court would hold her wedding in the spring, the ceremony quiet by Fae standards, witnessed by Bastian and Lorelei and Valerie, who attended with the specific expression of someone who has decided that something is acceptable even if it was not their preference, which from Valerie was roughly equivalent to a standing ovation. Edmund Daxton, the old clan elder, who had witnessed the original treaty signing 11 years ago and had carried the guilt of his silence ever since, sent a written blessing from the Wolf Kingdom's eastern province that arrived on the morning of the ceremony, folded small, on paper that smelled of pine. Ignis didn't attend. He had not been invited, and he had not asked. The twins arrived in autumn. Lorelei delivered them with her characteristic efficiency and complete absence of drama, which was exactly how Cassie had wanted it. A girl first, silver-eyed and already certain, born reaching, and a boy 4 minutes behind her, who arrived into the world with the focused calm of someone who had decided the whole, Business of being born was manageable and had taken his time accordingly. The girl's magic was fey bright from the first breath. The boy's was something else, warm and deep and wolf-lit, the kind of power that moved through the earth rather than the air. Two different inheritances, both complete, both present, neither diminished by the other. Caspian held his daughter and looked at her with the expression of a man who had spent 40 years being unshaken and had just discovered that some things arrived precisely calibrated to undo that entirely. "She has your chin," he said. "She has your certainty," Cassie said. He looked at her over their daughter's head with the expression she had come to know as his version of warmth, contained, deliberate, entirely real. He reached for her hand with the hand that wasn't holding their daughter, and she took it. "I didn't know," she said quietly, "what it felt like to be chosen, not fated. Chosen." "Neither did I," he said. The court was quiet around them. Outside, the Duskhollow sky was its impossible violet blue, and the silver trees stood in their positions, and the threshold garden held its gold reflection, and somewhere in the east, beyond the Ashwood and the silver boundary, a wolf kingdom was figuring out how to become something better than it had been. It was not a simple life. It would not be. Two realms negotiating peace was ongoing, painstaking, full of moments that required both parties to choose the harder thing over the easier one. Cassie sat in those negotiations and said exactly what she thought, which was sometimes inconvenient and always necessary. Caspian sat beside her and did the same, and the thing that made it possible was not power. It was the particular steadiness of two people who had decided that honesty between them was non-negotiable, whatever it cost. The twins grew up between two worlds and belonged to both, which was exactly what they were designed for. And Cassie Valor, who had been told she was not enough, who had been cast into a dark forest to disappear, who had kneeled on a cold stone floor and believed, for one terrible minute, that she was exactly as worthless as they said, became something none of them had ever imagined. Not despite being Barren, not to prove a point, not as revenge. Because this was who she was, underneath every verdict that had been handed to her without her consent, underneath every year of making herself smaller, underneath every morning of reaching for a hand already gone from the bed. This was who she had always been. It simply took the right place to recognize her. Cassie Valor walked into the Ashwood with nothing left to lose, and came out carrying everything that mattered. She was never barren. She was never broken. She was never the thing they named her in that hall on the night of the blood moon. She was a convergence, two worlds held in one body, two bloodlines finding each other across 3 generations of distance, two small lives growing inside her that would one day stand between those worlds and make them better. And she chose, with full knowledge and full courage, the man who saw her clearly, not for what she carried, but for how she stood when everything was gone. If this story moved you the way it moved me in the telling of it, stay with us. There are more stories where worth is reclaimed, and love is chosen, and power finds the people it was always meant for. Every single one of them begins with someone who refused to stay down. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment telling me which part of Cassie's story hit you hardest. I'll see you in the next one.